The distress signal arrived at 6:44 a.m. on Channel 16. Not a voice. A digital automated transmission, the DSC alert that maritime vessels used when they needed to broadcast an emergency position without human intervention. The signal identified the transmitting vessel as a dhow-type craft, gave a position approximately 1.4 nautical miles ahead of the destroyer's current track in the eastern approach corridor of the Strait of Hormuz, and designated the emergency type as man overboard. The signal was clear, correctly formatted, and broadcast on the international distress frequency at the correct power level. The CIC watch officer logged it at 6:44 and 12 seconds a.m. and immediately cross-referenced the position against the destroyer's radar picture. The position matched a contact that had been logged since 6:31 a.m., a small vessel, consistent with a dhow-type fishing craft, that had been proceeding westbound at 3 knots in the eastern approach corridor. At 6:44 a.m., the contact had stopped. It was stationary at the transmitted position. It was broadcasting a man overboard emergency, and the destroyer's current course and speed would bring it to the contact's position in approximately 7 minutes. International maritime law was unambiguous. The duty to render assistance to persons in distress at sea was not optional, not subject to operational discretion, and not contingent on the identity or nationality of the vessel in distress. Every maritime nation's law codified it. The Solace Convention embedded it in international treaty. The U.S. Navy's own operational regulations confirmed it. A vessel broadcasting a man overboard emergency at 1.4 nautical miles ahead was a vessel that the destroyer was required by every legal framework that governed maritime operations to assist. The CIC watch officer pressed the intercom. Bridge, CIC. DSC emergency broadcast, Channel 16. Man overboard signal from small vessel bearing 028, range 1.4 nautical miles. Contact is consistent with dhow-type craft that has been logged westbound since 0631. Contact is now stationary. Our current track brings us to the contact position in approximately 7 minutes. The officer of the deck acknowledged and reached for the intercom to the captain's sea cabin. His hand was on the handset. He paused for approximately 2 seconds before pressing the call button. Those 2 seconds were not hesitation. They were the specific cognitive moment in which a trained professional registers that the combination of circumstances, the timing, the location, the position ahead in a transit corridor, the nature of the emergency, warranted the captain's presence before any other action was taken. He pressed the call button. At 6:46 a.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He walked to the radar display and spent 15 seconds reading the picture. The stationary contact was ahead at 1.2 nautical miles. He noted its position in the eastern approach corridor, the same corridor the destroyer was transiting, the same corridor that the 4 supertankers following in the destroyer's lane would be using within the next 20 minutes. He noted the time the contact had first appeared on radar, 6:31 a.m. He noted the time the distress signal had been broadcast, 6:44 a.m. He noted the specific combination of 2 contacts that had appeared on the radar since 6:31 a.m., but had not yet been called to his attention because, until the distress signal at 6:44 a.m., there had been no reason to call them to his attention. 2 small, fast contacts that had been holding position near the northeastern approach to the Qeshm Island radar shadow since before the watch began. He noted all of this. He did not yet speak. He turned to the FLIR display and requested a thermal image of the stationary contact ahead. The FLIR, the forward-looking infrared system, produced thermal images based on heat differential rather than visible light. At one point, 2 nautical miles in the early morning Gulf atmosphere, the FLIR's resolution was sufficient to distinguish between a vessel with cold engines, a vessel that was genuinely stopped and had been stopped long enough for its propulsion systems to cool, and a vessel with warm engines that had recently been running. The thermal signature of a diesel engine that had been shut down for the purpose of staging a stationary position was not the same as the thermal signature of a diesel engine that had been shut down, because the vessel had genuinely lost propulsion. The FLIR operator reported at 6:46:30 a.m. Bridge, CIC. FLIR image of the forward contact. I'm reading thermal signature on the engine compartment. Engine heat consistent with recent operation. I say again, the engine is warm. The contact shows active thermal signature in the engine housing, consistent with a diesel engine that has been running within the past 20 to 30 minutes. A vessel broadcasting a man overboard emergency at 6:44 a.m. with a diesel engine that had been running within the last 20 to 30 minutes was a vessel whose engine was warm at a moment when the engine should have been cold, because a genuine man overboard situation did not involve a planned stop at a predetermined position with the engines warm and waiting. The captain turned to the officer of the deck. "I have the con." His voice was the same volume it would have been ordering a course change. He looked at the FLIR display for 3 additional seconds. Then he turned to the 2 contacts that had been holding near the Qeshm Island radar shadow. They were at 3.1 and 3.4 nautical miles to the northeast, holding position in the way that contacts held position when they were waiting rather than patrolling. Waiting was different from patrolling in a specific and identifiable way on a radar display. Patrolling contacts moved in patterns, changed bearing and speed at intervals, maintained the active movement of vessels with ongoing objectives. Waiting contacts were still or minimally moving in the way that vessels were still when they had a specific trigger to respond to. The trigger was in front of the destroyer at 1.1 nautical miles, broadcasting a man overboard signal on Channel 16 with a warm engine. The doctrine was documented. It appeared in the master prompt as rescue pretext, a specifically IRGCN associated tactic in which a vessel positioned itself in a shipping lane and staged a distress call to force a U.S. warship to slow or stop, at which point fast attack boats emerged from their staging areas to conduct a close approach under conditions where the U.S. ship's speed and maneuverability had been self-reduced by its own compliance with maritime law. The tactic worked because it exploited the one obligation that outranked tactical discretion in the maritime world, the obligation to assist persons in distress. The asymmetry was legal as well as tactical. If the destroyer slowed to investigate the distress call and the fast attack boats emerged and conducted a harassment operation, Iran could argue on Channel 16 in the encounter record to the international press that it had been conducting a rescue operation that was interfered with by aggressive U.S. naval activity. If the destroyer did not slow and the claim of a man overboard was somehow genuine, the moral and legal consequences were incalculable. The trap was built from the gap between those 2 outcomes. The FLIR data had partially resolved the gap. A warm engine was not conclusive proof that the distress call was staged. Engines could be warm for legitimate reasons that were consistent with a genuine emergency. But warm engine data combined with the proximity of 2 fast attack boats in a waiting posture near the Qeshm staging area, combined with the position of the contact in the exact center of the transit corridor at the exact moment the destroyer was approaching, combined with the timing of the broadcast at the exact moment when the destroyer's CPA to the contact was 7 minutes, the combination was not ambiguous. CPA to stationary contact, 7 minutes. CPA to fast attack contacts northeast, approximately 9 minutes at their current positions if they initiated approach now. At 6:47 a.m., the captain authorized a Channel 16 broadcast. He did not authorize the broadcast for the purpose that Channel 16 broadcasts were normally authorized in standoff situations, to notify an approaching vessel of the destroyer's legal transit status. He authorized it for a different purpose. All vessels in the vicinity of the eastern approach corridor of the Strait of Hormuz, this is a United States warship on a lawful transit. We have received a man overboard distress signal from a vessel on our current track. We are conducting a thermal and visual assessment of the reported distress position. Be advised, our assessment indicates the reported distress vessel's engine is operating and shows active heat signature consistent with recent propulsion activity. We are evaluating the distress claim and will determine our response based on this assessment. All vessels are advised that we are maintaining our current course and speed pending completion of this assessment. The broadcast was deliberate in every word. It was not a refusal to respond to a distress call. It was an announcement that the distress call was being assessed. It was broadcast on Channel 16, which meant it was received by every vessel in the eastern Hormuz corridor, by every shore-based monitoring station, by every intelligence service listening to Channel 16 in the region at 6:47 a.m. It placed in the encounter record, before anything else happened, the specific fact that the destroyer had thermal imaging data on the distress vessel, and that the thermal imaging data was inconsistent with a genuine distress situation. Whatever happened next, that data point was already in the record. The two fast attack contacts to the northeast had not moved. They were still in their holding positions. CPA to stationary contact, 5 minutes, 30 seconds. At 6:48 a.m., the Seahawk received authorization to launch. The Seahawk was not authorized to position alongside the fast attack contacts or between them and the destroyer. It was authorized to overfly the stationary contact at 300 feet, document the vessel's configuration, deck condition, crew positions, any visible equipment, and provide a visual and thermal assessment from altitude that would supplement the FLIR data the CIC already had. The helicopter launched and reached the stationary contact in approximately 2 minutes. At 300 feet, its camera provided a clear image that the CIC monitor relayed to the bridge display. A dhow-type vessel, approximately 15 meters, wooden construction, single diesel engine compartment aft. The FLIR overlay from the Seahawk confirmed the engine compartment heat. More significantly, the camera showed 3 individuals on the vessel's deck, not in the water, not in a distress configuration, but on the deck, standing, one of them looking upward at the helicopter. The vessel was not showing the orange distress equipment that Solace-compliant vessels carried for man-overboard situations. The life ring was in its mount, not deployed. A man-overboard distress call in a vessel where the life ring was still in its mount and the crew were standing on deck. The Seahawk pilot's report came on the circuit at 6:50 a.m. CIC, Seahawk. Visual on the contact. 3 personnel on deck, all standing, no one in the water. Life ring is mounted and not deployed. No visible rescue equipment deployed. Vessel appears to be in normal operational configuration. Continuing thermal imaging pass. The bridge crew received this report in the specific silence of a space where information is being processed rather than discussed. The officer of the deck looked at the captain. The captain was looking at the bridge windows, where the stationary vessel was now visible to the naked eye at approximately half a nautical mile. A low, dark shape in the early Gulf morning, its engine exhaust visible as a faint shimmer above the stern. He could see the vessel clearly. He could not see anyone in the water because there was no one in the water. CPA to stationary contact, 3 minutes, 20 seconds. The second friction event arrived at 6:50 a.m. when the stationary contact's DSC emergency transmitter rebroadcast the man overboard alert for the 3rd time. The automated system was cycling on its standard repeat interval, broadcasting the same position, data, and emergency designation that it had been broadcasting since 6:44 a.m. The repeat broadcast was the system functioning as designed. An emergency transmitter did not know whether the emergency was genuine. It only knew that the alert had been set, and the repeat interval had elapsed. The 3rd broadcast appeared in the CIC communications log and was automatically forwarded to the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Bahrain that monitored Channel 16 emergency broadcasts for the Gulf region. Bahrain Maritime Rescue responded at 6:51 a.m. with a query to the destroyer. Confirmation of distress situation requested, status of rescue operation, estimated time to assistance. Standard protocol for a coordination center that had just received an emergency broadcast forwarded by a naval vessel in the area. The communications officer handled the Bahrain query. He acknowledged receipt, provided the thermal assessment data, engine warm, crew on deck, no distress equipment deployed, no persons in the water confirmed by aerial observation, and stated that the U.S. destroyer was conducting ongoing assessment and had not yet determined that a genuine distress situation existed. He sent this response simultaneously to Bahrain Maritime Rescue and to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Manama. The response was on the record. The record was complete. The fast attack contacts to the northeast had not moved. They had been in their holding positions for 23 minutes. A vessel that was genuinely staged for a rescue support operation moved toward the distress signal when the distress signal was broadcast. These contacts had not moved toward the signal. They had remained in their holding positions 3.1 and 3.4 nautical miles to the northeast, waiting with the specific stillness of contacts whose trigger had not yet been pulled. The captain stood at the center bridge window. He was watching the stationary vessel ahead and the 2 fast attack contacts on the northeast radar display simultaneously. not by physically alternating between the windows and the display, but by the specific trained attention of a bridge officer who had learned to hold two physical locations in simultaneous awareness and to read developments in both without prioritizing either. He had been holding this dual attention since stepping onto the bridge at 6:46 a.m. He had not yet spoken to anyone except the communications officer and the Seahawk pilot, both in brief operational exchanges. He had not responded on Channel 16 to the distress vessel. He had not responded to the distress vessel because responding to the distress vessel directly, acknowledging the distress claim, communicating with the crew on deck, engaging with the staged scenario on its own terms, was exactly what the scenario was designed to produce. Every second of engagement with the staged distress claim was a second in which the destroyer's attention was directed at the forward contact rather than at the northeast, where the actual operational decision was being prepared. The actual operational decision was FLIR assessment first. Thermal data into the record, Channel 16 broadcast of the assessment data, Seahawk visual confirmation, Bahrain Maritime Rescue notification with the thermal and visual evidence, and then, only then, the forward vessel's crew had to decide whether to maintain the distress claim in the face of documented evidence that the engine was warm, the life ring was not deployed, and all crew were standing on deck. CPA to stationary contact, 2 minutes. The helmsman was 25 years old. He had held course 270 since the watch began. The standing order was course 270. The contact ahead was stationary and broadcasting a distress signal and was now 0.8 of a nautical mile away. Visible through the forward bridge windows as a specific shape on the Gulf water, its crew standing on deck looking toward the approaching warship. Every maritime law in the world said, slow down. The standing order from the captain was course 270. He held course 270. His hands were at 10 and 2. The course stayed. At 6:52 a.m., the stationary contact's engine signature changed. The FLIR operator reported it before anyone on the bridge had processed the visual. CIC, bridge, forward contact is showing increased thermal output from the engine compartment. The engine is running at higher power. The contact is moving, not away, toward the southern edge of the transit lane. A slow movement, approximately 2 knots, taking the vessel off the center lane position it had been occupying and toward the shallower waters south of the corridor. The dhow was clearing the lane. The distress call had been broadcasting for 8 minutes. The life ring was still in its mount. The crew were on deck. The engine had been warm since before the broadcast began. And now, with a U.S. Navy destroyer at 2 minutes CPA distance, a Seahawk helicopter overhead documenting every detail of the vessel's deck configuration, a Channel 16 broadcast in the encounter record citing thermal imaging evidence of engine activity, and a Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Bahrain in possession of all of this data, the vessel was clearing the lane. It did not cancel the DSC broadcast. The automated system continued cycling, but the vessel was moving. The 2 fast attack contacts to the northeast registered a speed change at 6:52:30 a.m. Not an approach, a withdrawal. Both contacts increased speed simultaneously from their holding positions to approximately 28 knots on headings that took them northeast, away from the destroyer's position toward the Bandar Abbas approaches. They had been holding for 26 minutes in positions that were consistent with the forward contact still occupying the center of the transit lane. The forward contact had cleared the lane. There was no longer a trigger for the fast attack approach. The fast attack contacts departed. CPA to stationary contact revised. The contact was no longer on the intercept track. Its new heading carried it south of the destroyer's lane. The CPA, which had been decreasing toward 0, was now opening. 100 yards, 150, 200 and climbing. The captain watched the CPA number climb for approximately 45 seconds without speaking. Then, resume course 270 at 15 knots. Maintain current heading through the corridor. A pause. Seahawk. Continue documentation for 2 additional minutes, then recover. Document the fast attack contact's withdrawal vectors as well. Another pause. Communications officer. Complete the Bahrain Maritime Rescue notification. Log the resolution. Distress claim unconfirmed by aerial and thermal assessment. Vessels cleared the lane. No persons in the water confirmed. No assistance required. He looked at the chart table. Fifth Fleet message. Distress pretext attempted, assessed and documented. Contacts cleared without engagement. Encounter closed. He looked at the radar display once more. The fast attack contacts were at 4.2 nautical miles and opening at 28 knots. The dhow was at 400 yards to the south of the corridor and still moving slowly south. The DSC broadcast was still cycling. The automated system would continue until someone on the dhow manually canceled the emergency transmission. That was a detail that would appear in the encounter report and in the Bahrain Maritime Rescue log, and in the Fifth Fleet intelligence product that would be generated from this encounter. It was a detail that said, whoever staged this left the emergency transmitter running when they cleared the lane, because canceling the transmission was an admission that would appear in the encounter record as clearly as anything else. No one canceled it. It continued cycling. The destroyer passed the dhow's position at 200 yards to the north and continued the transit. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment. The helmsman unclenched his hands from the wheel with the specific quality of release that followed sustained precision under unusual pressure. He had held course 270 through a man overboard broadcast, a stationary contact directly ahead, and the knowledge that the maritime law of every nation said something specific about what ships did when they heard that broadcast. His hands had done what the standing order said. The standing order had been course 270. The course had stayed 270. The contact had cleared. The course had been right. The officer of the deck adjusted his collar. He was looking at the radar display, where the fast attack contacts were at 5.1 nautical miles and opening. He adjusted his collar again, a second time, and then stopped, aware that he was adjusting something that did not require adjustment, and that the awareness itself was a kind of decompression. The captain stood at the chart table. The Strait of Hormuz was ahead. The narrowest point was 18 minutes at 15 knots. The four supertankers following in the corridor were at 12 minutes astern. None of their bridge teams knew that for the past 8 minutes, the corridor they were following had been occupied by a stationary vessel, broadcasting a distress signal whose engine was warm and whose crew were standing on deck. The captain would note in the encounter report that the FLIR data had been the deciding factor. Not because FLIR data alone was conclusive, but because FLIR data entered into the encounter record before any action was taken meant that the entire subsequent sequence of events, the Channel 16 broadcast, the Bahrain Maritime Rescue notification, the Seahawk documentation, the vessel clearing the lane, the fast attack contacts withdrawing, was documented in a chronological order that made the operational logic of every decision transparent. The record did not need to argue that the distress call was staged. The record simply presented the thermal imaging data, the visual observation of crew standing on deck with life ring mounted, the fast attack contacts holding northeast, and the vessel clearing the lane when the documentation was complete. The argument was in the sequence. At 6:55 a.m., the DSC emergency broadcast cycled for the final time. Then, approximately 90 seconds later, it ceased. Someone on the dhow had canceled the transmission. The Channel 16 frequency returned to its standard monitoring state, empty of the distress broadcast that had been cycling since 6:44 a.m., carrying nothing but the static of a busy international waterway in the morning hours of the Persian Gulf. "Good watch," the captain said. He walked toward the sea cabin. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. One IRGCN associated vessel, a dhow-type craft approximately 15 meters in length, broadcast a man overboard DSC emergency signal at 6:44 a.m. on the international distress frequency, from a position directly on the U.S. destroyer's transit course in the eastern approach corridor of the Strait of Hormuz. Two fast attack contacts consistent with IRGCN patrol boats held positions in a waiting posture at 3.1 and 3.4 nautical miles northeast, consistent with a staged rescue pretext operation. FLIR assessment of the distress vessel initiated. Yes, at 6:46 a.m. before any course or speed change. Engine heat signature of distress vessel, active, consistent with diesel engine running within 20 to 30 minutes. Life ring status, mounted, not deployed. Crew on deck, 3 personnel standing. Channel 16, broadcast of thermal and visual assessment data. Yes, at 6:47 a.m., prior to any contact with the distress vessel and prior to any decision to approach or hold course. Bahrain Maritime Rescue notified with full assessment data. Yes, at 6:51 a.m. Seahawk deployed for aerial documentation. Yes. Visual assessment confirmed crew standing on deck, no persons in water, no distress equipment deployed. Fast attack contacts northeast, holding for 26 minutes, then withdrew at 28 knots when forward vessel cleared the lane. Closest approach to the destroyer at time of withdrawal, 3.9 nautical miles. DSC emergency broadcast canceled by transmitting vessel. Yes, at approximately 6:55 a.m., following the vessel clearing the transit lane. Course alterations by U.S. destroyer, 0. Speed reductions in response to the distress broadcast, 0. Closest point of approach to the distress vessel, 200 yards. The Strait of Hormuz is the most watched stretch of water on Earth. The IRGCN used international maritime law as the mechanism of the trap, the obligation to assist persons in distress, which no naval officer could ignore and no legal framework suspended. The FLIR made the warm engine a fact of record before the trap could close. The Channel 16 broadcast made the fact of record public before anything else happened. The Seahawk made the fact of record visual. By the time the staged vessel cleared the lane, the record had been assembled. The distress claim had been documented into irrelevance. 1 warm engine, 8 minutes, 0 course alterations. The strait remained open.